Now before I jump into the customs guide, I want to thank Sikrena and Forte for creating the You Can Work on Custom Epics guide, alongside Meng's custom epic guide from the 80% DFO Discord. I also like to extend my thanks to the members of the 80% DFO Discord for helping me along my custom building, as they've helped me significantly in my own progression. Without the guides they've created and the numbers they've crunched, I personally wouldn't be able to make this video myself, and I personally wouldn't even be able to touch customs. So a big shout out to those people. Really appreciate with the work they've done and numbers they've crunched. So I'll link the documents they've created in the description below. So if you see them in game or on Discord, give them a shout, show them some support and love. But yeah, I'll just move on to the guide now. So just before we get into the equipment itself, I need to explain what an inherent option line is and what a common line is. An inherent option line is basically a unique option line that can only be rolled on that specific equipment on that specific slot, whereas a common line is a line that any piece of equipment on that slot can roll. Besides that, you might hear people describe a custom as a 3-4 or 4-4. That just means it has 3 out of 4 desirable lines or 4 out of 4 desirable lines. Ideally, in all scenarios, the bare minimum is to aim for 3 out of 4 and nothing less. Now on to customs. If you're a beginner and you have no idea what customs to farm or keep, these are just some of the most general ones you can commonly use and keep to roll in the future. Starting with Deep Diver earrings, Deep Diver air pack, Deep Diver mask, Blue Pirate shoulders, Forest Witch belt, Forest Witch ring, End Spirit top, Blue Barrel top, and End Spirit subs. These are just the most general customs that most people use that are applicable to most builds. So if you don't know what you're doing now, just hold on to these, and then when you know what you're doing or you have the cubes to roll them in the future, just come back and then just roll them then. Now very quickly, I'll be briefly going to each slot and explaining what are the most common customs for which build, but not what lines to aim for, as that will take a really long time. So just look up for which custom you need for your build, and if it's not mentioned, feel free to look into the 2 documents linked. So firstly, we'll start with the tops. Now in general, realistically, there's probably only 2 tops you'll use, which is the Blue Barrel top and the End Spirit top, as they're used for Bleed and Archon respectively. The other top you might see used is the Forest Witch top, which are meant for DD or BB bracelet builds as well. Just a different build that you see people run. And the other 2 tops, the Deep Diver top and the Blue Pirate top, are rarely used if ever, but the Deep Diver top is used for the very elusive Awakening build. Otherwise, just stick with the rest, and now we just move on to shoulders. Now moving on to shoulders, the 2 most common shoulders are the BP shoulders and the DD shoulders, so the Blue Pirate shoulders and the Deep Diver shoulders. The BP shoulders are used more for cooldown, while the DD shoulders are used more for damage. And in general, you can choose between these 2, and which one you choose is personally, I believe, up to preference, and just up to your class whether you need more cooldown or more damage. It's just up to you. Otherwise, the 3 other shoulders will only be seen in certain cases, such as being a manual player, the End Spirit shoulders becomes mandatory as it has a massive 12% skill attack line, while the other 2, the Forest Witch shoulders and the Blue Barrel shoulders, can help you funnel into specific skill level ranges. But realistically, you should probably choose between the Blue Pirate or the Deep Diver shoulders, as they're much more simpler and easier to use and more commonly used, so it's just a safer choice in general. Now moving on to bottoms. The most common bottoms you have are the End Spirit bottoms, which has an inherent bleed lines alongside 35 and 40 skill level funnel, which is pretty strong and popular. Alongside that, you have the other choices, which are the Deep Diver pants, which are used for a 75 and 80 skill level funnel, and then the Forest Witch pants, which are used for a 35 and 45 skill level funnel. These 3 bottoms are the most commonly used, so pick based on your build and your class. And outside of that, you have the Blue Barrel bottoms, which are used for sleep alongside high elemental damage. And then you have the Blue Pirate bottoms, which are used for burn and self-status builds alongside the really rare Awakening builds. And that will pretty much be it for bottoms, and we'll just move on to belts now. The Forest Witch belt is the most popular options for good reason. It has great CD options alongside great skill damage options with almost 0 condition to activate. But getting a perfect 4-4 belt is quite difficult, so you can technically aim for a Deep Diver belt, which provides good flat damage bonuses. However, if I'm going to be completely honest, you're better off rolling for a 3.5 to a 4-4 Forest Witch belt. It's just much more worth it in the long run, and in general, it's much more worth your investments. Otherwise, the other belts aren't also really worth running at all, outside of certain cases such as the Blue Pirate belt, which is an option for sleep builds, and the End Spirit belt, which is an option for poison builds. And really, that's the only other builds I would consider running belts that are not the Forest Witch belts. The Forest Witch belts is just really popular, really strong, for good reason, and it should only realistically be the only belt you should aim for. And now moving on to boots. Typically, you won't see any custom shoes options, as the fixed shoes are just really strong, with a lot of them providing utility alongside a lot of skill attack, meaning it's hard to replace. However, if you play a 75 level skill funnel class, you might be able to get away with the End Spirit shoes, as they provide a inherent 12% skill attack line if you play half manual, which isn't too bad. The other shoes that you might consider could be the Deep Diver shoes, which has great damage options, but even then it struggles to beat fixed epics, so it's a really strong maybe there. Otherwise, the other custom shoes that I use are the Blue Pirate shoes, because they're used for the freeze burn builds, and they have two really good pairing options that are really strong for burn, so that's a really good case there. Whereas the Forest Witch shoes and the Blue Barrel shoes don't really see much play outside of their very niche shoes, and even then that's a maybe. So shoes wise, it's probably one of the last slots you replace. But yeah, we'll move on to bracelets now. Essentially, unless you're planning on changing your build into a DD or BB bracelet build, you won't even consider changing the slot into a custom. As fixed bracelets are the core of 90% of current builds, if you're changing these, you're probably changing them into a TP skill build, or you're changing it into a Deep Diver bracelet build to build around flat damage scaling. Outside of those two options, the other three customs bracelets don't really see any play, so that will pretty much wrap up this section. So DD bracelet is for flat damage scaling, BB bracelet is for the TP skill build. Next up, necklaces. So moving on to necklaces. So for necklaces, you have more of a choice. Generally aim for a common necklace line that improves consumable buff effects by 30%. So if you're not using any potions or consumables, you probably shouldn't switch to a custom necklace. But the only necklace that's not that super popular in global, at least, it's the DD necklace, or the Deep Diver necklace. And its usage is very niche for the cube burning build. Outside of that, I don't believe it's used. So if you want a more general necklace, there are some recommendations, which is the Blue Pirate necklace with the inherent line that increases your skill attack and skill range, so it's just really useful in general for most builds. Then you have the Forest Witch necklace, which is used for the bleed builds, or bleed damage builds. Or you have the Blue Barrel necklace, so it funnels into 40, 70 or 75 skill range. And last but not least, you have the End Spirit necklace, which just stacks a lot of LE damage with a very specific inherent line. And that'll pretty much be it for the necklaces. Not much else to say besides the damage gain from swapping from fixed to custom is very marginal, and it's not really high in priority, so necklaces is one of the last fixed epics you replace. So moving on to rings now. The most popular options for rings is the Forest Witch ring, which provides a massive 30% to your cooldown to your skills if you can meet the condition of the highest abnormal status tolerance being 50%. Forte, which is already provided by the line itself, and you just have to source another 10%, which is pretty easily done. Outside of that, if you don't want cooldown and you want more damage, there is the option of the Blue Pirate ring, which has an inherent line of clear cube attacks plus 8%, which is great, and alongside other damage option lines, can be a really powerful damage rings. Besides those rings, you can choose to use the End Spirit ring, which is mainly used for status builds, which converts even more of your damage into status damage. And then the DD ring, or the Deep Diver ring, is to stack even more elemental damage. While the Blue Barrel ring is okay, it's just not the greatest, and honestly, in my humble opinion, you should stick with either the Forest Witch ring, the Blue Pirate ring, or the End Spirit ring, according to your build, either status, Archon, or bleed, and avoid the other two in general. Now finally, sub-equipment, earrings, and magic stones. I'll clump these three slots together because honestly, you just want to aim for the same 4 common option lines across all 3 slots, which is the 5% skill attack lines against status enemies. Outside of specific inherent lines, feel free to use any customs you might have dropped as a 3-4 or a 4-4 while farming, as 4 of the status attack lines are a perfect custom in my opinion. But just to get more specific for some builds, I'll start with the sub equipments now. Now with sub equipments, let's just start off with the End Spirit cups. You can use it for bleed and Archon with its specific inherent lines targeting those. But I do believe the Archon line is being changed so that any build can use it, which is great. Outside of that, shock builds can choose the Forest Witch basket, which has a specific inherent lines to increase shock damage. And besides those two, there isn't any other inherent lines you should look for on sub equipment, so feel free to use any one that's applicable for you with the build. Outside of that, just hunt for these 4 status attack lines. So next we have earrings, which the most common ones are the Deep Diver earrings, which is used because it has an inherent skill attack line, which increases your skill attack damage by 6% against bosses, which is really nice and really flexible in general. Next you have the End Spirit earrings, which is used to pad even more status damage. So look for the specific status with the line and then just use it. And then lastly, you have the blue pirate earrings, which is most commonly used with the TP shoe / skill build, which has a really powerful inherent line that can potentially increase the level 75 skill attack by about 12%. So if none of these apply, just look for the DD earrings, the deep dive earrings, which is just the most general ones and just the most useful, so you can pad the extra 1% if it's a perfect 4-4. But outside of that, if you do drop a 3-4 or 4-4 of any other earrings, feel free to use them, no stress. Now finally, you have magic stones, starting with the deep diver stone, which has a really strong inherent lines, which is counter attacks increases skill attack, not the opposite, which is non-counter attack increases skill attack, so please read carefully. Alongside the end spirit stones, which is used to stack even more elemental damage. And lastly, you have the blue pirate stones, which has an inherent bleed line, which does come with a condition, so please read carefully and maintain the stacks. However, it also has two other inherent lines that requires you to either hit from the front or the back, but these conditions are being removed in May and will just increase your damage straight up by 5% and take less damage if you take damage from the front or back. So that does come in May, so you have to wait a bit if you roll it down. And once again, if none of these apply, just use the DD stone. That's the most popular and most general one to use. And this would pretty much sum up the 3 slots, guys. Remember, if you drop any of these as a 3-4 or 4-4 with the status attack lines, feel free to use it, as these 3 slots are some of the hardest to roll with cubes. And just before I end the video, I'll just give you guys some tips on how to roll and transition into customs, and maybe as a beginner, what order you should focus these customs in. So in my recommendations for replacing fixed into customs would generally go like this. You'll probably start with the top, into the shoulders, into ring, into the bottom, into the belt, into sub-equipment, earring or M-stone, necklace, and then shoe or bracelet depending if your build requires it. So you'll notice the order goes from top to shoulder to ring. That's because top and shoulders are, in my opinion, the easiest 2 slots to roll. You can replace them starting at 3 out of 4 instead of a perfect 4-4. So it's just the easiest to roll to get a 3 out of 4. It's really common and it's just good lines, and the fixed epics aren't that strong. And then you have the ring following that. It's because the ring provides, if you're going the force rich rings at least, it provides a massive 30% cooldown, which is just really strong. And if you're going for the blue pirate ring, it also gives you a massive amount of damage. So it's just a nice replacement to take early on. You don't have to roll the perfect 4 out of 4. You can settle for 3 out of 4 in rings, in my opinion, just because of the damage and utility it provides. Outside of that, I would suggest going to bottoms into belts, because bottoms, once again, just like top and shoulders, are easy to replace. So it gives you more damage into your funnel early if you're running 45, 75, 80. And then the belt, which is the Force Witch belt, is quite difficult to roll, especially if you're trying to get a 4 out of 4. But I personally believe you can settle for a 3.5 or 3 or 4 out of 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 4. So if you get lucky, get a 4 out of 4, but if you don't, you can settle for a 3 or 3.5. And then you have the hardest slots to roll, which is the sub-equipment, earring, M-stone, and necklace. The reason why necklace is shoved behind the other 3 is because necklace is... the damage increase from replacing your fixed necklace isn't that much. So your priority should lie in sub-equipment and magic stone and earrings. Sub-equipment can be rolled easier because sub-equipments are much, in terms of fixed at least, are much weaker than the M-stone and earrings. The fixed M-stone and earrings are very strong slots, so you have to have a perfect 4 out of 4 in order to replace it. Otherwise, you'll just straight up be losing damage. And then shoes and bracelet, like I mentioned before, they're really strong slots, and bracelets are, unless you're going for the DD or BB build, there's no point in replacing it. So that's just my general recommendation. If anyone has any comments, feel free to leave a comment down below and I'll edit the video, or give my tips and stuff like that. So yeah. And that'll pretty much be it for this video, guys. Once again, thanks to Sikrena and Forte and Meng from the 80% DFO Discord. They created the original guides. They're the ones who crunched all the numbers, so big shout out to them. Without them, this video wouldn't exist, and I wouldn't play DFO, or well, I wouldn't be able to work on customs. Anyways, if you guys have any more questions, leave them in the comments. I'll try my best to answer them, and in the future, if you guys want another video on customs, let me know. I'll try to work on it. Although any more advanced than this will require pretty in-depth analysis, which I don't mind. However, I'm not sure if my information will be 100% correct, so please bear with me and give me some time to do my research. But outside of that, thanks for watching, guys, and see you guys soon.